Today we'll be learning about CSS Grid. CSS Grid is a display property used to make grids. For example, here you see, suppose there is another fourth element, then these things would be in a grid of 2 by 2. So currently we have made this horizontal layout by display inline block. But there are some problems with display inline block. One of them is it leaves space between block. See here, you might be thinking this is because of margin, right? Yeah, it is true. But even if we remove this margin, there will be still a little bit space between these two div elements. Let me show you. Let's cut this and save this. Notice we have never given any space, but still there are some spaces. Such small spaces causes calculation error because such small cases can be problematic and can cause alignment issues. By the way, you must be wondering where does this space comes from. So this space is actually coming from, see, these two div elements are, this is the first div element and this is the second div element. We have put some spaces between these two div elements. That spaces is combined to get one single space. If you remove these spaces, then obviously the space will be gone. Let me show you. See, now there is absolutely no space between these two elements. But this causes our code tedious to read. So let's undo this. Now one more issue with display inline block property is that they are not properly aligned. Currently they all have equal content, that's why they are perfectly aligned. But if we remove few elements, then their alignment at the bottom will not be same. So for these problems, we can use display grid property which will not be having any of this problem. So let's create a file called grid.html. Let's remove this from the style section and then give it a proper structure. Doc type, HTML element, head. Here we can give a title and write grid and write CSS grid. And inside body, let's create two div element. Now open this with live server. Okay, now we have these two elements. Let's write div1 and div2. Save this. There we go. Now to convert these two div elements into a grid, we need to put these div element into another div element. Write div and let's cut this from here. Paste it here. Save this. Okay. Now we need to style this div element so that we can convert this into a grid. For that, let's create a CSS file, grid.css. Put this inside CSS folder and let's do one thing. Let's open this HTML and CSS file side by side. Close this. Let's link this first. Relation style sheet href styles and then grid and then close this. Now let's do one thing. Let's make this at 1. Close this window. Fine. Save this. Now let's give this div element class, say grid only. Save this. And here we'll target grid. Now to convert these two elements into a grid, we'll write display grid. We need to do one more thing. We need to give a width to both these columns. Now before moving further, let me tell you what a grid is. Grid is a layout that has rows and column. For simple example, we are taking just two elements, and these two elements will be in horizontal layout, which means our grid will be of two column and one row, like one element and another element. So these two are column and one row. Now we know we have two columns, so we need to give both the column a width. For that, write grid template and then column. And here, since we have two columns, so we'll write two values. Let's say first one 100 pixel and second one again 100 pixel. Save this. There you go. This is the first element and this is the second element. Now to see this clearly, let's give this a class d1 and this class d2. Save this, and here let's give them a background color so that we can see that container, right? Dot d1 background color, some light color like yellowish. Save. Okay, fine. Now for d2 dot d2 background color, let's give this aqua color, which is also light color. Fine. Now there you have seen this is a grid of 2 by 1, two columns and one row, and both of them have a width of 100 pixels. Now you notice one thing, these two are a div element only, and we know div element is by default a block element, so it is supposed to take up the entire line. But since these two elements are inside a div element, which is a grid by display property, so therefore they are both appearing in the same line in spite of being a block element. Now you must be assuming we have given two values to our template, and we are also providing only two elements. So you might be thinking, what will happen if we give another element? So let's see, only copy and paste this, save here. Now see, since we have only given two value for pixel width, so that's why the third value will automatically go in a new line. Again, you might be also thinking, what happens if we have only one element and we are giving two values? Let's see also. Nothing, there will be just one element only. So it's like that. Save this. Let's make this div 3 and add one more element of yellow color. For that, copy d1, paste it here, write d4, div 4. Fine. Now this is a 2 by 2 grid. Now you will see that all the problems we talked about in display inline block property, like this spacing problem and all this, they are all solved in grid property. There is no space, nothing, and no alignment issue also. Here these elements will not be vertically aligned if we have irregular amount of content in each of the element. Let me show you what I mean. Let's open that file. So it is image.html and we need image.css. So let's do one thing. From one of them, let's remove this paragraph line. Save this. See, this is the alignment issue that we are facing. But in this case, if we add or remove any element, their alignment will not affect. They will always be aligned. So let's see that also. First, let's fix this. Okay. Now let's go to our grid file. Let's write few extra content inside this element so that its vertical alignment changes. So let's create a paragraph element and write para. Save this and see. Since paragraph is a block element, therefore it needs another line, so it has not appeared in the same line with div1 because of it being appearing in a different line. Overall height of this element got increased, but just to keep the alignment proper, the height of div2 also got increased. This will not be happening in display inline block property. This is the advantage of using grid element. We can even change the width of this column. Here we can write any value. For example, let's write 300 pixel for the first column and 100 for the second. Save this. You see. Now let's do one thing. Let's copy this from here and now paste it down here. Save this. Okay, let's first of all make this a grid 2, and here target dot grid 2. And first of all, let's give upper margin so that we can distinguish them clearly. Right, margin top 40 pixel. And now since we have not made this div element a grid, that's why all these four elements are appearing in a different line. Let's first of all give display property of grid, save, and now we need to give them a column width. For that, write grid template columns, and here let's write first value, let's say 200 pixel, and second value let's write 1 fr. So this 200 pixel, but this fr stands for free space, which means use as much space as it is remaining in the line. Now let's save this. You see, this is a 200 pixel and this is going till the end of this page. Let's do one thing. Let's make these elements to appear in the center of the block. For that, here write text align center. So this was for D2. So therefore these aqua ones text got in the center. Again apply the same property for D1. Text align center. Perfect. Now this value of 1 fr is very important. Suppose if we want to give both this column equal value and we do not know the width of this page, so what we can do is we can just write 1 fr and 1 fr. Save this. Now this 1 fr means distribute the remaining space in two parts and both of them will have equal space. You might be thinking this looks smaller because we are not seeing the whole page. Let me make it a full screen so that you can see clearly. See, these are exactly equal and half of the web page. Now this 1 and 1 is like a ratio. If we write something like 2 pixel, then this will mean distribute the free space in 3 parts and give 1 part to first column and remaining 2 to the second column. Save this. Now you will see this is 1/3 and this is 2/3 of the page. You can even give 3 values. Write 1 fr, 1 fr, 1 fr. Here we have 3 values. You cannot distinguish it because of same color. Let's copy this from here and paste it after div2 and div3. Okay, now you can see these 3 are equally divided. You can also write 1 fr, 2 fr, 1 fr, which means distribute the free space in 4 parts. Give 1 part to first column, 2 parts to second, and one remaining one to the fourth. You will see this. Okay. One more thing, you can even set the height of these elements by yourself. So for that, first of all, let's make one more element for this empty space. Now this should be of aqua color. So we'll go for D2, copy this, paste here, save, fine. And let's change the value for now div 3, div 4, div 5, and div 6. And let's set the height of this div 4 something like 80 pixel. Now the class of this div 4 is D2, so we can here write height 80 pixels. Perfect. Here this element already has some height. We can even decrease the height. Let's say write height 50 pixels. Okay. And the problem is these 3 elements got the height of 80 and these 3 have the height of 80 pixels. So this causes alignment issue. Although by default this div element does not create any alignment issue, but we are now forcing the alignment issue. We have forced this value to be 50 and this value to be 80. So let's remove this so that it looks clean. Save this. Now you might be wondering, here there is no space, but what if we actually want some space? For example, here we actually needed some space, so there we had given some right margin. But here, what if we want actually some spaces between these 3 columns? For that, we'll go to our grid styles and here write column gap. This is a pretty straightforward property. Write 4 pixel, let's say. There you go. You can even give a bigger value like 12 pixel. There you go. Now we have a 12 pixel gap between each column. We can even have some space between rows. For that, again, very simple property. You might have also guessed it. Row gap. Again, let's give this a value of 8 pixel, let's say. Perfect. That's all for this CSS grid.